Many thanks to both of you. I need to point out that we're running on a bit of a tight ship here, not only because eventually people will get hungry. I don't know how you celebrate Shabbat, but there are some people who are quite strict about what time they light their candles, when we're going to have a Kabbalat Shabbat for those who do. But so we need to be quick with timing. These are two very different talks, but they both, we put them together. I mean, who knows why people put things together in conferences? There are all kinds of funny contingencies. But both of you have things to say that would be quite surprising to most of the Germans in the audience. And so I want to start by asking a question of each of you. Philip, you gave us a terrific overview, terrific also for, I know you could have talked for several hours about it. Thank you for keeping it short. What interests me, and what I think is not well known here at all, if Israel has played such a role for American Protestants over the years, I did not know about the Great Seal or several of the things you talked about. How do they feel about real existing Jews, and what is their relationship? I mean, it's too broad. I'm sure it's different between Pentecostals and evangelicals and between individuals within them, but can you say anything general, particularly about the question of, you know, if there's supposed to be a return sooner rather than later, since they think the apocalypse is coming, what is going to happen to the Jews?
Is this on? Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is one of these incredibly thorny, long-standing theological debates, and the nerd in me would love to do a deep dive on this, but I'm not sure I should do that. I think what I will do is take up the first part of your question, which is, what do conservative Protestants feel about real existing Jews? And there's sort of good news and bad news. So I mean, I think the good news is that while this pattern that Peter Beinart identified, where you find this combination of pro-Zionism and anti-Semitism, I mean, that certainly still exists, particularly amongst an older generation, more so amongst evangelicals, less so amongst the younger generation, far less so amongst Pentecostals, where you find increasingly what people like to call philo-Semitism, but what I would actually call something more like phantasmo-Semitism, where it's not just that, you know, the Jews are just like us. It's like, whoa, they are so much better than us. I'm just going to give you like one example of this. About a month ago, I ran across an advertisement for a shofar holster. Yes, you heard that right. A shofar holster, because of course a shofar is a spiritual weapon.
You might have to tell the goyim what a shofar is.
Oh, you know, the ram's horn that is blown on certain ceremonial occasions traditionally, but which they really understand is that as a weapon of spiritual warfare. And the ad for this, you really can't make it up. It's just like really buff, super Israeli-looking dude in tight jeans and a tight T-shirt. I can't really make a specific assessment of his anatomy, but I'm guessing he would score highly. Facing the temple, within the background, they've kind of blended in the Western Wall and the Temple Mount, right? So, you know, this is sort of, the Israeli Jew as a kind of superhero. But of course, as often, there is a distinction between, tacit at least, good Jews and bad Jews. And, we know who the good Jews and the bad Jews are. I mean, the bad ones are the liberals, the cosmopolitans, the secularists, the non-observant, the mixed marriage ones. So that, I mean, that would be sort of a quick answer to that question.
One thing crucial, though, is the U.S. is a race factory, and the U.S., unfortunately, that construction depends on emphatically making Jews white. And one of the things in terms of the history of Jews in Europe, where Jews were emphatically not white. But the thing about it in the US context is, and this is connected to issues around religion, if one could separate the race and the religion, what it afforded for Jews who could become white, it relied on the religiosity of Judaism in order to create access to full citizenship in a racialized way. And this has created something that's a meeting of neoconservative Jews with white nationalists. And this kind of a meeting also creates a situation in which a whole world, of Jews are erased.
Can I just, you're leading right into something I want to ask you, but can I just ask you, without going into, I know there are variations on the apocalypse theology, but because I suspect there are people here who don't know any of it. Mm-hmm. In fact, I have often been in situations in Germany where I have had to explain to people that there are Christian Zionists. There once in a while you'll see an article about it, but it's not well known. Somehow an article appears, I wrote one, other people write them, and then they disappear for another few years. It's not in many people's vision at all. They're quite surprised. So I just wonder, without going into the variations in Jesus returns and who goes to hell and under what circumstances and all of that, if you could just give a kind of short explanation of what most of these denominations believe will happen when the second coming comes.
Again, I think this is something which there are a lot of variations. So, sort of the old supersessionist version is that the restoration of Israel means the restoration of the church and of Jesus's kingdom. It doesn't mean the restoration of the Jews. There's the idea of a physical restoration versus a spiritual restoration. There are questions about whether Jews must be converted before the second coming or after the second coming, whether all Jews will be converted or whether only some Jews will be converted. I think, honestly, that your average run-of-the-mill Christian Zionist these days doesn't really trouble themselves too much about the fine points anymore. They're just, somehow or other, it's just great that the good Jews are back in Israel and that Jesus is coming soon.
What is so hard for many people to understand, and it's sometimes hard for me to understand as well, there's this utter love of, this has happened to me in places like Mississippi. There's this crazy philo-Judaism. We love you, you're God's people, I give all my money to the state of Israel. But the idea is, of course, when Jesus comes again, we're going to disappear in one form or another. The Jews that they love so much are going to disappear, either qua Jews, because we will all immediately be converted, or before, right after, or if we don't convert, it's our tough luck. I just wonder if you could just fill that out a little. I know that there are, deep and long theological discussions.
I think this is one reason why this doesn't get discussed as much anymore is because there just is a real tension between present-day pro-Israel sentiment and philo-Semitism. It's much more easily resolved than the old days where, you could be pro-Israel and anti-Semitic at the same time because, well, Jews are eventually going to get their comeuppance, and that's just fine. So I think really people ignore this question more than they confront it now. And these Christian Zionist circles, that's at least my experience.
Do you have any experience with them, Louis?
With whom?
The Christian Zionists. I mean, that wasn't the real question I was going to ask you. I was going to ask you something else.
I mean, I've seen them. But what's strange is Christian Zionism, actually goes way back, even before the founding of the United States. One of the things that really blew me away was one time when I came back from Jerusalem, I was hanging out in Oxford, and I realized a lot of the layout is basically Jerusalem. And if a lot of Christian cities across Europe and many places are really efforts to create new Jerusalems. So at a basic grammatical level, that is already there. And even down to the Thanksgiving ritual was supposed to be, was basically Sukkot. And so the thing is, for some of you who are not aware of it, one of the criticisms I bring up is, you probably may have surmised from my presentation, I am Jewish. And I was a lot like the Ethiopian guy there. In my childhood, I didn't know there were white Jews. But here's the point. When I said I didn't know there were white Jews, it wasn't about skin color, because my family was from light to dark. I didn't associate light skin with an equation of whiteness. You see what I'm getting at? So for me, my family looked like a lot of the Jews in this room from light to dark. And so it was weird to me. I had to figure out what this whiteness thing was when I came to the United States. But within that framework, similarly, where related to your question, is what it is to be Jewish in Jamaica when I was a child. Because it's a very different thing at a social level, because we knew we were different. We had an identity as Jamaicans, but we also had an identity as Jews. And there were people who kept referring to us as holy. So, right? But there's a different kind of exoticized notion in terms of philo-Judaism, and the way in certain other languages they'll say people of the book or stuff like that. And so it wasn't a sense that we were superior, but we were connected to something, the argument was, there was something more ancient. In the United States, because of its whiteness stuff, it became a very different kind of conversation. Because it was the first time, for instance, I saw people throw pennies at people who are Jews, and I'm like, what the hell is this? Or when I got to see Holocaust films in middle school, I began to realize this whole other story. And within that framework, I did not see in the United States, this philo-Jewish stuff is really connected to, I think, a set of political forces. Because just very quickly, if you look at the evangelicals, a lot of them actually were pro-abortion. But in order to build a larger anti-left coalition, they met with conservative Catholics who had anti-abortion in the mixture, and they met with other groups, for instance, deregulation, privatization, et cetera. And what is happening now is that anti-leftism has become an organizing mantra that's creating a kind of romanticization of a whole lot of other categories. So for instance, even people who, given their location, should be critical of class politics, have become valorizing billionaires, et cetera, even though they're clearly going to screw them. So I do think that the philo-Judaism we're seeing right now is connected to a committed anti-leftism.
I'm going to ask you one more question. It's a big one, and it's one that's been discussed in this country for the past year and a half. There's been, I mean, it's discussed elsewhere, but we've had a particularly harsh and not terribly useful debate about the question of whether racism and anti-Semitism are fundamentally different. Can you, I mean, because you were talking about dehumanization, can you give us a little riff on that question?
Yes. I'm one of the critics of the view that they're different. The people who want them to be different are the people who want to have a gateway into Jewish whiteness. The fact of the matter is, It's true. The fact of the matter is that race and racism came about first as a theonaturalistic category against Jews and Moors. So at the heart of the founding of racism was against Jewish people. It gets really more complicated, mainly because it's related to some of the stuff we were talking about with moralism. I wrote a piece in which I talk about what do black Jews think about at Pesach, right, at a Seder. And, you know, there are people, I'm not one of those black Jews who say that people who identify as white are not really Jews, okay? But the people who, there are some people when they say, you know, they're going to be liberated from slavery, they're thinking about it in a very remote way. When a black Jew is sitting there talking about slavery, we're thinking, damn, it's pretty close. And the other part that's really complicated, though, why I bring this up is I do notice there's a form of fetishizing of anti-Semitism as a category in order to evade the liberation question. Because there's no way to talk about liberation without talking about colonialism. And if one, and so I wrote a piece about why Jews should be concerned with liberation. But to talk about liberation is to talk about a whole complex set of issues around being Jewish that, unfortunately, the people who are invested in Jewish whiteness want to avoid. Because for them, it means an alignment with a certain set of politics that would ultimately support imperialism and a lot of other problematic positions. So I do think, actually, that anti-Semitism is actually a racism. Because anti-Semites really, really believe there's Jewish saliva, Jewish blood, and they really, really believe that deep down, people who convert to Judaism are not real Jews, and the list goes on and on. And so, and it's not only externally, they're also internal to Jews, a view constantly about real Jews in that kind of racial language. Now, of course, there's the other complex part, because we already know that you can racialize anybody. You can turn anybody into a race. And one, just like the way I gave that Speech Act example. And so my point isn't that what people really are racially. It's about how in the social world people are constructed and treated. And within it, there is a mechanism that will unfold. So yeah, absolutely, I do take the position that anti-Semitism is a racism.
I take the same position. So thank you for setting it out. I'm also with an eye on Shabbat. We timed the schedule of this conference extremely carefully. We looked up what time Shabbat begins on June 10th so that everyone could take part in everything. But I'm not going to take any questions. I also don't see anybody lining up desperately. We are now going to take a break until 5:30 sharp. If you come late, you will simply miss what happens. We won't wait. And that will still leave us only 15 minutes late, and we still have a margin for Shabbat.
Shabbat Shalom.
Yeah, Shabbat.